Dungeon Master player characters. Oh boy, this one actually inspired this entire series. And so I have a lot to talk about, so this will be a long one. But unlike the past few videos, this one will be edited since I finally redeemed my key from Sony Vegas it's been sitting in my email since January. Thanks, Humble Bundle. My opinion on DMPCs has changed over the years. Let me start from the beginning with my first experience with a DM who used a Dungeon Master player character. So we were starting a new campaign for the third time. This was the third campaign in my group, that is. And my friend, we're going to call him Daryl, was Dungeon Mastering for the first time. And he had come to me with the concept for the campaign. And he said, hey, I want to do something kind of like Mario 64, where there's a castle that serves as a hub for all of the places to explore. I'm like, that's an interesting idea. How are you going to link that in? He says, it's going to be time travel. Each of the doors in the castle is going to lead to a different time period as well as a different location in time. I'm like, that's really cool. All right. Time travel is an interesting mechanic. Are you prepared to deal with the consequences of your players time traveling? And he goes, oh, yeah, I've got it all figured out. So I'm like, okay. And he comes to me and he goes, I think I want to have a guide character. I'm thinking like Zelda, like Navi. You know, there's something guiding the players through and I'm like, ugh. Now, giving the players a guide is something, but giving like a designated character to it that's following us around all the time might not be the most fun thing. I told him, we might find it kind of annoying to have this character following us around all the time. And he said, yeah. So he ended up adding the character in. So we start the campaign, and we all wake up in a field and we don't know where we are. We meet this kid out in the forest. We come to find out is named Kail. And Kail takes us to his home, which is this huge mansion. And I'm like, okay, so this is what this guy was talking about, right? And it went better than I expected, at least for the first few sessions. I was surprised at how unobtrusive having a Dungeon Master player character really was. Because Kail really did just serve as a general guide through what we were doing. And of course, he's a kid, so he's not helping in combat at all. And I thought at first, hey, this might be an interesting idea because now we have a purpose in combat other than kill the enemy. It's protect this kid. And that's kind of cool. And I wasn't expecting the kid to do anything in combat, so I wasn't expecting him to, take the spotlight away from us other characters like most Dungeon Master PCs would. So after a while, Kail starts showing magical abilities, and I think, whatever. If Douglas wants to put a Mary Sue character into his campaign, who am I to stop him, right? As long as it doesn't detract from my experience, I'm not going to care too much. And in fact, it didn't detract from it at all. Kail's magic pretty much started out as invisibility, which, okay, removed him from consequence in battle, so we didn't even have to care about him anymore. And healing. So when we got injured, since we didn't have a cleric in the party after our cleric left, he was going to be our main source of healing. So I thought, that's actually kind of cool. That might actually build a relationship with us and him. And in fact, I was seemingly the only player not building a close relationship with this kid. My good friend really, really liked him. She really almost saw him as like, a son. And it made sense for her character because in her backstory, she had a family that she had lost. And so she kind of saw this kid as her own. But my character was not about that. I was a 20-year-old, whatever, kind of cool dude type of character. So I didn't care anything about this kid following us around. But here's the issue, right? We were required to take this kid wherever we went because it was his magic that made the doors in the mansion work. So not only do we have to have him open the door to get to new time and place and wherever adventure location, but we also had to have him to get back. And this led to extreme railroading, which is an entirely different problem than DMPCs. But when your Dungeon Master is using one controversial element of D&D to fuel another controversial element of D&D, it can kind of go awry pretty quickly, and it did. And in fact, we found ourselves pretty much railroaded almost everywhere through that campaign. I mentioned this in my previous video when I was talking about the time where we engaged a monk after my friend made the save and wasn't knocked out by the gas. And then we were railroaded into being knocked unconscious and then taken into whatever other plot hook. But anyway, that's another story for a different video. So eventually, Kail got to be super annoying. We noticed that he had a lot of hit points, and it seemed uncharacteristic of him since he seemed to be a child spellcaster. It also got to the point where I noticed that the more Daryl was finding cool spells in whatever splat books he was finding in 3.5, he was giving Kail those spells retroactively. And as far as we could tell, he was a sorcerer, so that shouldn't have been the case. Especially because this kid wasn't fighting with us, so he probably shouldn't have been leveling up with us. But, for example, Douglas one time told me before a session about an ice spike spell where a character could create a spike of ice and then shoot it like a spear. And then guess what spell Kail used during that particular session? Yeah, you could probably guess. More and more, it seemed like Kail was taking up more and more screen time, if you will. Dylan was pretty much using him for every plot hook and every single plot device, and in fact, he seemed to be the main character of the story, as we found out he was somehow related to the owner of the mansion, and we were trying to figure out how to get back to our own times and places, so the mansion was pretty much the only way to do it. But eventually we decided it wasn't a big deal, and we were still enjoying the campaign, so we decided to look past the flaws in Douglas's storytelling using Kail. However, then this kid named Neo showed up. Now, we already had one child in the party, right? So a second one wasn't all that exciting. However, we encountered this kid, and he's basically the street rat, right? He's been raised pretty much homeless the whole time. He definitely urchin background if this was 5e. He seemed to think he was a total badass. And for a 8-year-old kid or so, it wasn't very convincing, and of course, why should we care that this kid thinks he's a badass? I remember the first time we met him, Douglas rolled on the table and said, "Tight." He holds his hand crossbow to the side, fires, and you see a bird fall out of the sky. And I'm like, congratulations, you shot a bird. Let's move on now. And I had no clue that Dylan actually thought that this character was going to be something that he was gonna hit it off with us, and we were gonna think he's so cool. And worse, he thought that having Neo around for the rest of the game was a great idea. Since we already were babysitting one kid, why not babysit two? You could see where the problems start to arise. It also didn't help that I was playing a Beguiler, which is essentially a spellcasting rogue. And it was very clear that Neo was showing rogue properties and would be using rogue abilities. So having a sorcerer kid with some healing abilities wasn't that big a deal because none of us were healers, right? None of us had any healing abilities. Now you bring this rogue into this game where I'm already doing rogue stuff, it definitely started to detract from my experience. It was especially bad in that first session with Neo because we got an adventure hook to forge documents that a guy would give us his house, basically forge a deed. And of course I'm like, I don't have the forgery skill. The forgery skill's useless. And all my friends turn to me and go, "You're the rogue. Why don't you have the forgery skill?" And I'm like, when have we ever used forgery? I'm using escape artist and stealth, Like those are the skills I've been putting my skill points into. And they're like, "Gosh, dude." And then of course Neo's like, "I know how to forge things." So I'm like, already this kid is doing rogue things, right? So I'm like, "Fine, kid, here, have the document. Go crazy." And he writes something down, and of course it passes for the document, because of course it's going to succeed. And then it really turned into babysitting blues. About everywhere we went, we had to get Kail and Neo out of trouble. The most memorable of the time was when we went to bed in the inn, and we came downstairs and found out that Kail and Neo had run off for the day, despite the fact that we told them not to move and that we would be leaving immediately the next day. Essentially, Duncan had come up with a new plot hook, and he wanted to use it in this time and place and couldn't use it in the next location we were going to. So he shoehorned it in and railroaded us into it. Basically, the kids had run off to this elementary school, I guess, where the principal was brainwashing them. So we had to fight them both. And of course we used non-lethal means, but still, Kail seemed extremely powerful. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, he had a lot of HP. And it seemed very strange that he was just tanking as this 8-year-old kid spellcaster. He's tanking our hits, and it's very odd. Of course, we eventually dropped them both, and of course, we basically handcuffed them to each other because, of course, we weren't going to let them out of our sights again. And you might be wondering, why did we have to take Neo along? Well, we didn't, and that's the issue I had. Whenever I suggested that we leave Neo behind, one of my friends said, no, we can't leave him behind. He's homeless. What is he going to do? We've got to find him a place to stay. He can come with us. And I'm like, no way. We've already got one kid in danger. Why would we keep two? Well, it's because my friend in my party, who we'll call Joseph, happened to be Duncan's roommate. And he said, hey, Duncan, let me make an NPC for you. So he made Neo, and he made him have all these cool things, and then when he showed up, was like, hey guys, this NPC's super cool, let's keep him around. I will never, ever forgive Joseph for that, for as long as I live. So of course, every time I suggested we leave Neo behind, Joseph was just like, no, there's no way we're doing it. We stayed in that campaign for probably 8 months, and we all just got sick of it by the end. So, despite being like level 16 after starting at level 1, and being so close to the end of what Dylan had prepared as the end of the campaign, we stopped playing. We decided that we were going to drop the campaign because we couldn't do it anymore, man. And so I swore off Dungeon Master PCs forever. But naturally, over time, my opinion of DMPC started to shift. My buddy Frank ran one off with DMPC named Ramon Dough in it. And because Ramon Dough was so much lower level than the party, and he was generally roleplayed as a fraidy cat, he didn't detract from the experience at all. And in fact, he wasn't supposed to be a DMPC at all. Frank put him there as a quest giver, essentially, and then we demanded that he come with us because he was so much fun. I started a new game thereafter pretty soon, and I wanted to make sure that everyone felt welcome at my table, even if they were new to the game. I created an NPC known as Arturo that would help kind of introduce them to the mechanics. He was a ranger, and he didn't do a super whole lot in combat, but he did show people around the world, literally around the area that was given to them at level 1, as well as guide them through the forest and things like that, and help them to keep from getting lost. Then, shortly after the first session or so, he was kidnapped, and now the players have to go save him. So he was never a full player character for very long. However, when he was around, the players really bonded to him and liked having him around because he was useful in helping them, but wasn't taking away from the spotlight. If I could do that campaign again, I would definitely make Arturo a bard, because bards always add to the experience instead of detracting from it. If you have a bard DMPC, they never have to fight in combat. They can simply give inspiration die to the players, and now instead of taking the spotlight away, you're giving more spotlight to the awesome moments. Then later in that campaign, we ran into an issue. One of my players wanted to take the leadership feat. Now, if you've never played 3.5, the leadership feat is one that is under a lot of controversy. Not many people allow it in their games at all, and if they do, it's severely nerfed. It essentially gives you a free player character, like a free second player character, as well as like numerous followers that will tend to your every whim. It requires you to take it at 6th level or higher, and then you get another player character that is 2 levels lower than you at all times. Or it's essentially 2 levels lower than you at all times. It's actually based on your charisma score, but 2 levels lower than you is where it maxes out. So my friend Hector decides he's going to take the leadership feat. And he decides, because he is now the captain of his own ship, that he's going to have a first mate. So I'm like, okay, we'll give him a first mate that's a swashbuckler, right? So despite her being kind of the duelist type, I gave her a crossbow so that she wouldn't do a whole lot of damage in combat. It also allowed her to stay away from the danger so she wasn't in danger of dying most of the time, since they were going up against pretty difficult encounters a lot of the time. Generally, this first mate, who became known as Rue, was only used for roleplay purposes. She was only around to give her advice, since she was chosen as the Spock to Hector's Kirk. But then my other friend, again, Joseph, decided that it was a good idea for him to take leadership as well. I think, oh boy, this party of 3 that's already basically a party of 4 is about to become a party of 5, and they're about to be almost half DMPCs. Well, I have to allow it since I allowed Hector to take it, so Joseph, what do you want? He goes, I want a wizard. I'm like, geez. That's really going to detract from the experience if he's doing all these crazy magic-y stuffs and you guys are doing these hitting things stuffs. So I decide he's going to be a transmutation wizard, and he's going to focus on casting buffs. That way he's always buffing the party and, again, giving more spotlight to the players rather than taking it away. So Rue and Caligo, who was the wizard, ended up becoming fully fledged members of the party. They were basically always just one step behind the player characters, which really was marginalized as the players got higher in level. You know, when they're level 15 and their helpers are level 13, it really didn't make a huge difference. However, it always felt like my players were the heroes, not Rue and Caligo. Rue and Caligo were just on the sidelines, adding to the experience. And in fact, in most stories, Rue and Caligo are forgotten, since they were only a minor part of the experience. That's all for today's video. So tell me your opinion on Dungeon Master player characters in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.